All right, so for this module, we are going to be looking at some of our building block movements that sort of comprise most of our belly dance vocabulary that we're going to be looking at here. So with these building blocks, you'll notice that there are sometimes going to be a little bit of overlap. So, as you're doing one of these movements, or movement ideas, I should say, you're going to be applying another in another part of the body. And there is a little bit of overlap as well, but we'll get into that as we go. So the first one that we're going to look at is the idea of something being weighted or unweighted. And when we say this, we're talking about where the weight of the body is being held in your base or in your legs and feet. So if I say we're weighted on the left side, that means all of the weight of the body is being carried on the left, leaving the right side free and unweighted to move around and kind of do what it wants to do. Vice versa, if we're weighted on the right side, the left is going to be free to move in an unweighted manner. Okay, so the second idea is this idea of flat and releve. This is another that applies to our feet and our base. So, and it is exactly as it sounds. So more or less, hopefully you can see my feet in the frame here. If we're flat, the feet are flat, and in releve, basically all that means is that you're coming up onto the balls of the feet. And when we're doing this, we want to make sure that we're strong all the way through the leg, letting that energy go all the way down into the floor. And we don't want to have our ankles kind of sickling in or out. Same with the knees. So releve versus flat, weighted and unweighted. Okay, so the third concept that I wanted to talk about was our slides. So our slide is basically this idea of moving a part of the body horizontally through space. Generally, when we're talking about our slides, we're discussing something in the hips or the upper body, or the chest, I should say. But we also see slides in the shoulders. We also can apply a head slide. But the concept is the same. It's this horizontal flat movement through space. So just to demonstrate, a hip slide is you're going to be pushing from the left, pushing that left hip to the right comes out, and vice versa, just side to side. We want to also, this is kind of an isolation sort of movement, so you don't want to necessarily have a lot of reverberation going on in other parts of the body. It's just a very flat, side to side movement, taking it up to the chest. Again, we want to stay on that flat plane, back and forth, like so. Now we can also take a slide into a diagonal, which again, we will see this as a building block to other movements. So in that case, you're just going to kind of turn the hips, in this case, to the diagonal plane, but the slide movement remains the same. And you can take it to the center, and then to the other diagonal, back to center, and the other diagonal. And again, you can apply that same diagonal in the chest, flat, diagonal, flat, diagonal, flat, diagonal, flat. Okay, so that's our slide. In relation to a slide, we also have this idea of bringing the movement forward and back. So again, we're still on a horizontal plane, but rather than going side to side or in diagonals, you're going to just bringing it straight forward and straight back. So this is a demonstration of the movement in the chest. So we're going forward and back, utilizing the muscles in the back, and then contracting a bit in the upper abdominal region. So it's a forward and a back. Same goes for if we're applying that in the hips, from the lower back region and the back of the body, the thighs. We're going to kind of bring the pelvis forward and back, forward and back. So we have a slide, slide, forward, and back. Slide, slide, forward, and back. And again, slide, slide, forward, back, slide, slide, forward, and back. Now, if we're talking about these slides in relation to what we talked about with being weighted and unweighted, you can also think in terms of, okay, my weight is shifting to the right, the weight shifts to the left. As we're coming back, the weight shifts toward the heels. And as we're coming forward, that weight is coming toward the toes or the ball of the feet. All right, so that's just one example of how these building blocks will relate to each other as they're applied in dance. All right, so we talked about forward, back, weighted, unweighted. Okay. The next concept, and this is, again, we're sort of in a similar territory, is this idea of a tuck or a contraction and a release. All right, so basically when we're talking about a tuck, most often, and this is not a hard rule, but again, we're talking about tucks mostly in the pelvis and also in the chest. So if we're tucking the pelvis, we're basically going to be tilting the tailbone down and bringing sort of this area that's just right below the belly button, kind of bringing it in. So that's our forward tuck. And the contraction is the downward pull is in the back and the contraction is in the front. So that's our forward tuck. And from here to go into our release movement, we would bring the tailbone back to a neutral position. We don't ever want to necessarily pop all the way back, but it is a return to neutral and a release of that tuck in the front. So just to kind of run that through, we go tuck, release, tuck, release, tuck, release, tuck, release. All the while, I am having a little bit of engagement in my upper body, just so I don't get a lot of this sort of movement happening. Not that that's a wrong movement, it's just not what we're doing right now. So we want to focus on tuck, release, tuck, release, tuck, release, tuck, release. Now we're going to try that in the chest as well. Actually, let's hold off on that because that actually relates more to this next concept that we're going to be talking about. But let's actually just string that all together real quick just to kind of practice a slide, forward, back, and a tuck, release, and just kind of seeing where the similarities are with those, but also where the differences are. So again, we're just going to do a horizontal slide with the hips. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, and tuck, release, 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 tuck, release. So if you'll notice, there is a little bit of a tucking motion that's going to be happening as you're going forward and back with the hips, for example, but also in the chest as well. There's this sort of tucking in and coming forward. So tucking in and forward, not collapsing in the shoulders, keeping the shoulders relaxed. So you are tucking as you're coming back a bit in the upper abdominal and coming forward, and that upper abdominal is going to release. All right, so from there, okay, the last two things I wanted to look at for our building blocks is this concept of bending and straightening. So we're going to come back down to the lower body, the legs for this, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Very often, this mechanical idea, we're going to be using this with things like lifting and dropping, which is what I'm going to talk about in a moment here, but also with our shimmies, and also thinking about like level changes. This is another area where this concept is applied. So a bend and straighten, usually when we're talking about that, we're talking about it in the knees. So just to practice that, you're going to bend the right, bend the left, bend the right, bend the left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Okay, and so when we're applying this to a shimmy, I'm not going to get too into it now. That's for another module. But the bending and the straightening is basically just going back and forth. The knees are passing by each other in sort of this scissor manner. You can also have the knees bending and straightening simultaneously, and that's going to create a different quality of a shimmy. It's going to be more of like a bounce shimmy. But you can also have the knees bending simultaneously to produce your lovely level changes. And again, the legs don't necessarily need to be together. Maybe you want to have sort of a kickstand position coming bend and straighten. There are many options, of course. So while we're looking at the bending and the straightening of the knees, you'll notice as I'm doing that, there is this sort of subtle reaction in the pelvis and hips where the hips are sort of doing this lift and drop side to side. So this is our last concept that I wanted to look at, is lift and drop. Again, we're talking very often in the pelvis and the chest, but we also will be exploring this idea with the shoulders, for example. So basically a lift and a drop is just coming up vertically through space and down. So our slide is horizontal. Same with the forward back. This is also a horizontal movement, but our lift and drop is going to be vertical. So there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it in this kind of 4-4 manner that we are looking at. The knees are bending and straightening, and there's also like a very slight weight transfer or perhaps energetic transfer between the two sides. But you can also do a lift and a drop on a single side, and in this case, very often you're going to be weighted on one side or another, leaving that other hip to be free to come up and down. And with this sort of lift, we're also engaging the side body and the obliques, pulling up into toward the center of the chest and drop. So it's lift, drop, horizontal through space, other side, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, bringing it to the chest. Again, we're talking about engaging in the back, coming up, keeping our shoulders down, coming up and drop. So we lift with the back, drop, engaging the middle of the chest, the upper abdominals, pardon me. So again, we go lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, and dun, 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 lift, drop, lift, drop. We see also this lifting and dropping in the shoulders. You can lift on one side, lift and drop, lift, drop, lift, drop. We also will see this in the arms. So we might be lifting the elbows and dropping the elbows, or lifting the wrists and dropping the wrists. So these concepts, again, can be applied to various parts of the body. So this is kind of our basic breakdown of our building block movements. As we're going through other movements, I do invite you to kind of see how these building blocks are related and how we can use them in our dance.